I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Hi, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Hellbent for Horror, Screaming for Pleasure live from Dark Delicacies in Burbank, California. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I am S.A. Bradley. I'm here to remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a special guest here, Heidi Honeycutt. She's actually going to take over the show. I'm going to be a prisoner of hers. She's going to take some time to actually interview me. First, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the book a little bit. What I'm going to do is give you guys a reading from my book. And so I'm going to move this a little bit and come on in and give you a little bit of what is in store in the book. For those that you have read it already, thank you so much. For those that have not read it yet, I hope that this gives you a good feeling about the book and that makes you want to actually read it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read excerpts from chapter 2. So if you don't know the book and you're here and you're just waiting for the bus, let me tell you a little bit about it. It is called Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. And you might be going, what? It can make you happy and healthy? Yes, I'm here to remind you of that as well. What the book does is a loving look at everything that is creepy and crawly in this world and also how it affects us. And when I talk about us, it's also just culture itself, how culture affects horror and how horror affects culture and how this is an art form. And just like any other art form, it can inspire you. It can change your life. So I give a few stories from my life. I also give a little bit of an essay on some of the work. And I also try to, piece by piece, talk about horror as this beautiful, large art form of what it is, which is much larger and broader than most people give it credit for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 2, which is entitled, We Bond Over Popcorn. So give you an idea of what this chapter is about. I'm really talking about the communal experience. So when I'm talking about the idea that horror can make you happy and healthy, there is an individual side where you find something about yourself that really connects to the horror aspects of story. But there's also this thing that we get, this wonderful piece, which is that we get to have a tribe with us. We find what we are passionate about, and it isn't complete until we have that passion meld with somebody else. So I think that it's very important that we have that communal piece, which is really going to the movies. So in this chapter, I talk about the idea of when you're watching a movie, you are basically creating a movie's legend just by being there. If you happen to have been there on the first week that Jaws opened, you are part of the history of that movie. You were there for that legend happening. Now, if you're in a movie that everybody hates, you are still part of that legend. But I always look at the idea that if you are there when the movie does what you want it to do, which is fulfilling a contract, I think that filmmakers and audiences agree on a contract when you first go in, especially a horror movie, where you're basically saying, I'm vulnerable. I will be vulnerable for you. I like your story. So I'm going to allow you to mess with me a little bit. But the contract is, you do me right, and I'm going to give you a summer of people not going into the water for Jaws. Basically, that kind of thing. That is a religious experience, signing that contract. On the other hand, if the movie does not work, man, the hatred can be really, really heavy, especially when people have already been made vulnerable. So, of course, me being me, we're going to talk about a sacrilegious experience as opposed to a religious experience. So there are plenty of movies that audiences hate. And usually people forget those films. But sometimes the audience goes in experiencing a religious experience, and instead they get something else entirely. It can be an uncomfortable and visceral experience when an audience loses faith in the movie they're watching. Instead of religious, it becomes a sacrilegious experience. And that's precisely what happened on June 25th, 1982, the opening day for the eagerly anticipated premiere of John Carpenter's The Thing. Now, the story takes place at an isolated U.S. research base in Antarctica on the cusp of another ruthless winter. The 12 men of Outpost 31 are a little stir-crazy from tedium, and they are bored with each other's company. Their ennui is disrupted when a helicopter from a Norwegian research camp located several miles away enters their airspace, shooting rifles and dropping live hand grenades. Their target seems to be a lone Siberian husky that then escapes into Outpost 31. Now, I consider this movie a masterpiece. To me, it is the personification of horrible beautiful. What horrible beautiful is to me is a horrible image, a grotesque image that is so unique that you cannot stop looking at it. And it gets you into a sense of awe. Several movies have that. Alien would be another one. Jaws has moments of horrible beautiful. I consider The Thing to be the ultimate movie of horrible beautiful. I put it on the same level as Jaws as a perfect horror film. And I'm not alone. You'll find The Thing on most critics' 10 best horror films lists. At least it's on those critics' lists now. It sure as hell was not in 1982. See, I went to see The Thing on opening day with my dad. By 1982, my dad and I had a strained relationship. We were two different people. We rarely seemed to agree on anything anymore, but we both loved John Carpenter movies. My dad loved John Wayne movies and Westerns, whereas I was more of a Steve McQueen guy. I preferred movies like Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway. As it turned out, John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 was a perfect hybrid between those two types of films. And that was the appeal of John Carpenter's early work. His films at the time were a bridge between two different generations of movie fans. I liked him because he was imaginative and his movies had cool ideas and cooler anti-heroes. My dad liked him because he thought Carpenter had class and style. Now, class meant that Carpenter's movies had the same kind of moral code like Westerns had. They featured plain-spoken people who might be reluctant heroes, but they still did the right thing in the end. To my dad, style meant that the movies were violent, not too violent. Sure, people swore, but they weren't bucket mouths. That means they didn't use the F-bomb. That was like anathema to my dad. My dad loved Halloween, John Carpenter's breakout low-budget hit about a mass killer stalking teenagers, and The Fog, an old-fashioned ghost story. He thought Escape from New York, a dystopian action film that cast the island of Manhattan as a maximum security prison, was okay, but he didn't like that ending. Nevertheless, John Carpenter was his favorite modern director. However, my dad's favorite horror movie of all time was the Howard Hawks Christian Nyby classic, The Thing from Another World. And John Carpenter's The Thing was actually a remake of that film. My dad was almost as excited to see this movie as I was. He wanted to see what Carpenter would do with a remake of The Thing from Another World. He knew that the director was a fan of the original film because he paid homage to it in Halloween with a scene that showed characters watching the movie on a TV. The combination of Carpenter and The Thing seemed to be a slam dunk. And I'm sure my father was not the only one in the theater whose favorite film was the 1951 version of The Thing. Fathers and sons are ready to bond over this movie. They made up most of the audience, and the place buzzed before the lights went down. My dad and a whole bunch of other dads signed the contract with John Carpenter before they even got into the theater parking lot. They trusted him with their favorite movie. The lights went down. The movie began. An alien spacecraft hurls towards Earth, and the movie then recreates that iconic burning title from the original film. I sense the excitement in the theater. My dad sits so straight, he is like 10 feet tall. I am getting chills. That excitement is very short-lived. The uneasiness starts small, but you can feel it. The first problem is that the movie is set on a military outpost in Antarctica, but the guys stationed there are unshaven and long-haired. In the Hawks version, the Air Force personnel are solid, clean-cut professionals who work together. The guys in Carpenter's version are lazy whiners by comparison. Then comes the character of Dr. Copper, a middle-aged man who wears an earring and a nose ring in 1982. On a 50-foot movie screen, the nose ring is the size of a bowling ball. You can't miss it. Now, these might have been an expression of Copper's rebelliousness as a character, but an earring and a nose ring meant something else entirely to my dad's generation. I hear my dad sigh, and suddenly I find that I'm embarrassed to look at the character on the screen. Then comes the first death from the opening sequence, where one of the crazed Norwegian researchers is shot dead by the commanding officer of Outpost 31. The death is clean and fast. But then there's a cut to a dead body on a slab. There's a lingering shot of the man with his eye shot out. The audience lets out a collective, ugh. Not seconds after that, There's a close-up of Dr. Copper sewing up a leg wound on one of the American scientists, and dads all around the theater start to grumble. And it just wasn't the dads, it was the kids too, because it was a bit much to watch that kind of thing in front of your disgusted father. By the time the movie was over, I was in a state somewhere between shock and awe. And that was saying something, because I was already a jaded horror junkie by the time I saw the thing. I'd seen the chest burster scene in Alien. I'd seen John Cassavetes explode and Brian De Palma's The Fury. I saw the werewolf transformations in The Howling. And I saw a guy get his nose cut off in The Sentinel. I saw Suspiria. I was no cream puff. Gore wasn't new. But the effects in John Carpenter's The Thing were next level shit. I still believe that special effects artist Rob Bottin's creature makeup and cinematographer Dean Cundy's creepy lighting has never been surpassed on film. It's not gore. It transcends gore. By 1982, elaborate special makeup effects had become a standard in horror films, but the focus was on making the effects as graphic and as realistic as possible. They may have reveled in gallons of blood, but the effects artists were still tethered to the laws of physics and human physiology. On the set of The Thing, Rob Bottin was not. There have been horror movies with bigger body counts, with more severed body parts, and much more red blood splattering the screen, but none of them were as disturbing as The Thing was when it premiered in 1982. And I think the reason The Thing's effects were so revolting and so unsettling was that other horror films showed the gruesome things that could happen to the human body. But The Thing showed you stuff happening to bodies that should not be able to happen. Things that were impossible. Other horror films showed you the desecration of the human body. The Thing showed you the abomination of it. The violence in this film defied physics and dove into the realm of the surreal. Heads split open and shoot out whip-like tendrils. Instead of familiar red blood, bodies tear apart to reveal sickening yellow and green fluid. Squirts all over the place. Stretched tendons go all over the place. There's arteries pulling apart. Viscous, unidentifiable body fluid splash the walls and the ceilings. Tongues sprout canine teeth. The violence to the body does not stop until the body is burned into ash. It is a vision of hell as a biological event. This stuff slithered into nightmarish Hieronymus Bosch territory. This was an evolutionary jump in horror. This was genre changing, and it took balls. And we were not ready for it. The tipping point happens when, in one scene, a dog's head splits open like a blooming flower to reveal a rapidly expanding creature made up of a glistening mass of tentacles, crab legs, dog parts, raw meat and sinew. Eyeballs sprout out of the ruined flesh. People in the theater shouted out, revolted. Hostile energy filled the room. It was amazing and scary. Some people walked out, but most stayed, holding out hope that anything would happen to rectify this horror. And that hope collapsed, along with the character Norris, who seems to suffer a heart attack and then falls over. Now, those of you who have seen the movie know that there's a 90-second sequence called the Norris sequence, when this man has his chest open up and a thing bursts out. I'm not even going to try to replay that. If you want to read it in the book, it certainly is there. But I'll tell you what happened after that. When I saw that 90-second scene, I got dizzy. I remember thinking, I might be going into shock. Any single moment of that sequence, there's 4 major pieces to that. Any single moment of that sequence would be shocking, but one aberrant image after another was devastating. The scene broke the back of the audience. After that, they were quiet, really quiet. After the movie, we shambled out in stunned silence. My dad didn't say anything. Like most of the audience, he was repulsed, and he erased the experience from his mind. We never talked about it. The box office returns for The Thing were disappointing, but The Thing was also savaged by the critics. The New York Times film critic Vincent Canby wrote, "It is too phony to be disgusting. It qualifies only as instant junk." Roger Ebert, the critic for the Chicago Sun-Times, called it a great barf bag movie. But the critical venom didn't come only from mainstream critics. Influential genre magazines also denigrated the film. Starlog magazine was an early champion of Carpenter and his films, but critic Alan Spencer wrote, "The Thing smells, and it smells pretty bad. It has no pace, sloppy continuity, zero humor, bland characters on top of being totally devoid of either warmth or humanity." Spencer didn't stop at criticizing the film. He had invectives for Carpenter himself. Here are some things he'd be better suited to direct: traffic accidents, train wrecks, and public floggings. Now, Carpenter laid most of the blame for the failure of his film on a prevailing shift in the culture at the time, one that he hadn't anticipated. And that cultural shift was typified by the success of Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which was released 2 weeks before The Thing, and of course E.T. was a runaway hit. Now, I think the popularity of E.T. played a small piece in what happened to The Thing, but I think that's really an oversimplification. I think Carpenter failed to fulfill the contract with the audience because he and the audiences had different expectations. The audience, and the movie executives in particular, expected a reasonably faithful update of The Thing with maybe just a little bit more edginess. And I think that was a major mistake. That assumption was a misreading of the ambitions and career choices Carpenter had already made. After Carpenter changed the course of horror with Halloween, he wasn't interested in making the sequels, despite the money he probably would have made. He refused to repeat what had already been done. Carpenter was going to use The Thing, his big Hollywood break, to alter the course of horror again by freeing us from that old rubber suit monster and giving us one we'd never forget. I'm sure Carpenter thought that's what everybody wanted. Something unforgettable and game-changing. Maybe it would have worked if he hadn't decided to remake The Thing. He forgot that, unlike Jaws or Alien, the audience already had an emotional history with the story of The Thing. In my dad's mind, Carpenter squandered the goodwill that he built with all his previous films when he trashed a sacred memory from his childhood. Whether it was fair or not, the audience felt that Carpenter broke their trust. They were vulnerable, so the stakes were higher, and the anger was deeper. The response to the movie was so strong and visceral, I couldn't get The Thing out of my head. A film that could generate that much hatred had power. It may have been offensive, but it was not inept, sloppy, or boring. It was well-crafted and thought-provoking. Carpenter's version of The Thing was too revolutionary, transgressive, and surreal for mainstream cinema at that time, 1982. But once the shock wore off, many of us kids in the audience realized that it was special. While our parents demanded their money back, us kids huddled together in the playground with a copy of issue number 21 of Fangoria magazine because it had a pictorial section on the special effects of The Thing. Everyone who showed up to the theater in 1982 helped birth the legend of The Thing. But some of us could not forget that movie. We carried the torch for it. We recommended it to people for decades. Eventually, the movie was reappraised by critics and is now considered one of the greatest horror films ever made. And that's why I like to say one person's sacrilege is another person's religious experience. Thank you. And so we have a second part of this show, which is a podcast. And I'm more than happy right now to hand the reins over to our guest, writer, director, film historian, actor, and festival programmer, and creator of Etheria Film Night, Heidi Honeycutt.
Yay! Go Heidi.
Go Heidi. Team Heidi.
What a great introduction. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I'm actually honored that you asked me to help out with this because this is an amazing book and you have an amazing podcast. And you are very much a journalist and author and contributor to modern horror film culture yourself. So I just want to say this book is, if you guys haven't read it yet, it's extremely personal in a way that I find really refreshing and accessible. So a lot of horror books are very academic and, they're very about, the final girl, what does it represent? Or, let's analyze sometimes they won't even tell you what the plot is because they're so, into describing the social whatever of it. And those are really inaccessible, I think, to the average fan. If you're not writing your master's thesis, right. I think sometimes those books don't really do anything for you. But this book is so, the personal stories and, you're very much a part of the story in the book. It's about, that's really nice and refreshing. And the only other book that I've ever read that I think I get that from is Kayla Janice, who is also a film programmer and author, wrote a book called House of Psychotic Women. And I don't know if anybody's read that, but it's kind of about how she relates to all these crazy women in all these horror films. It's totally kind of a different angle, but it's still just as personal. Right. So I just want to say thank you for writing something so personal and putting so much of yourself into it. Thank you. Everybody, give him one more round of applause.
thought you were going to say, can't you get yourself out of the narrative? What's your problem?
No, I think it's a good thing. I think we have too much academia and not enough personal in our horror writing, but that's me. I want to talk about this idea of the horrible beautiful, because that really sticks with me, because I have a thing with horror where I've seen so many horror movies, and I'm also kind of, there's something not right inside. So I really get off in a masochistic way on the most horrible things that I can watch, as long as they're fictional. Like real things, I can't watch. I can't watch a dog getting its toe stepped on. But if I know it's fake, like I want to see, like, Serbian Tale was not, or Serbian Film was not enough for me.
It was
like,
a lark.
There were scenes in it that I wanted to go further. Martyrs, I was like, I get it, but it's not really doing it for me. There's very few films that really do it for me. But The Thing is one of those films where you get that horrible, visceral feeling inside, and it's like out of your control, and you react physically to it. Another film that I've recently discovered that does that for me, which is really weird, is Frankenstein's Army.
Oh,
so Frankenstein's Army is a movie that came out a couple of years ago, under the radar a little bit, because it came out right when that horrible Dracula remake came out.
Right.
But nobody wanted to see it. And then there was like some other movie something Neil Marshall made that nobody wanted to see. And it just kind of like came out at the same time. And I was like, oh, Frankenstein's Army, that sounds really awful. So I actually never saw it. But I watched it for the first time not long ago. And it is one of the most grotesque, vile, but beautiful movies in the world. I think I'm very impressed by it, to the point where I was writing about a film for an anthology, and I actually switched my topics, and now I'm writing about Frankenstein's Army.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if you've seen Frankenstein's Army.
I've only seen, I can't say that
I highly
it did
recommend
much for me.
Oh, okay. I mean, I know that the people have problems with the narrative and this and that, but there's something about the physical effects and the pacing of it that is like awful. Like it makes you feel horrible. But for me, that's a good thing.
Right.
So to me, that is the beautiful, horrible thing.
Well, I think you hit on probably the biggest point of horrible beautiful is I don't want that to happen to me. And I think that's where I have a fascination with these things. When people ask me, why do I want to watch horror movies all the time? Why do I want to watch some of the more grotesque things? Why do I applaud the violence at times? They're like, why are you applauding this? And it's kind of like, I don't have control over all of the chaos in my life, all of the fears that I've had in my life. This is the one place that I actually, I wish for this to come to me. I wish to be able to survive this thing, and I'm going to be all right on the other side. And I can turn it off anytime I want. But at the same time, it is a win if you make it all the way through. And something about the horrible, beautiful, I don't know. I think some people you have the fight or flight, but then there's awe. And I really think that awe is like the greatest thing that a horror movie can do, dread and awe. Because when you have this idea of like in Alien where Brett is standing there and he's looking for the cat and we see the giant ectomorph behind him.
And you mentioned that in the book.
Yeah.
And yeah, right, that's a great moment where we see it and he doesn't see it, and it's horrifying. Yeah. It's one of the best in that.
When he turns, he doesn't scream. He doesn't run. He doesn't faint. He just looks at a dead god in front of him, this monster that's just going to take him. It doesn't matter. You see that kind of thing when you watch tsunami footage and there's a guy on the beach and he just goes, well, I'm fucked. And he just sits down and lets the wave hit him. There's just this whole thing of that kind of horror in our lives. And I think that I respond to that better than just a boo, because it is something that there's a beauty to it. I think Del Toro does monsters in a way of beauty. And I think that you can look at some of Argento's films and see an amazing amount of beauty in just the way that bloodletting is done. It's the passion that's behind that. And I think we really respond to the passion quite a bit.
I think a lot of times the art behind filmmaking gets lost in the discussion. But something like the original Suspiria is one of the most beautiful films I think ever made. Well, people say they hate the story or they don't know what's going on. And frankly, it's kind of weird. But just looking, like if you look at it the way you look at like a painting or a series of photographs, it's shockingly beautiful. Even the moments where people are being cut to pieces and destroyed and dead, and it's gorgeous. Yeah.
Well, speaking of movies that get that feeling in me, that horrible, beautiful, would be your short film. So those that don't know, Heidi created this movie. It was a 2007?
Yeah.
Called Wretched.
Back when I was young.
and Wretched is a short film. I was at a film festival and I was bored senseless. I was watching short film after short film. It was right when torture porn became something, so everybody did the same movie. We were like calling it chair porn. Everybody was tied to the same chair getting killed, but it was just different movies. And I'm waiting for something great to happen, and all of a sudden this movie comes on, and it's a horror movie about anorexia and bulimia.
Yeah.
And so it was this mindset of about a monster that was not only internal, but we were seeing this external reason for it to happen. We see two people having basically an argument, and one is going right at, the man is going right at the woman, but the woman is attacking the food. And so there's this argument happening with the food on the plate, and then she gets up and goes, I need to go to the bathroom. And we hear this voiceover that says, you know what, you have to have a system. And if you're going to eat food, make sure you do the brown food first and then the green food, and you stop when it's no longer green. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I in for? And it just gets creepier and creepier as it goes. And then it goes into either a psychological area or a supernatural area, depending upon what you want to look at. And I realized that that was a movie that I would have never thought of. And I don't think any guy would have thought of. I was like, who made this movie? So I found out about Heidi. And at that point, was it the Viscera Film Festival that you were doing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that was where I had screened it. I didn't screen it very many places because I don't know what I was doing. But I think I played it at Shriekfest and then a couple other things and whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think when you emailed me about it and contacted me, I was like, oh my God, someone has seen my film. That's really weird. You know, because it's kind of like it's on Vimeo now. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where I don't have the original tapes of it. If I wanted to put it on DVD, I wouldn't be able to. I just kind of forgot about it because it was an experiment in trying to figure out if I wanted to be a filmmaker. It's like when you dive into the horror world and you're like, who am I? Who am I? Am I the audience? Am I the writer? Am I the journalist? Am I the guy with the podcast? Am I the actress in the films? Am I that? Horror is very participatory. So you can do things with it as a fan that you can't do with other genres or other art forms, which is really cool. And it was my experiment of, do I want to be a filmmaker? And the answer was probably not. I'm not. I don't feel like that was the way for me to go. But it was a very personal story. I cheated because it's actually based a little bit on real life. It's shocking that
my book, Real Life.
Yeah. And at the time, in 2007, there wasn't this giant surge in women making horror films. In fact, we have one of them here today who was making films back then. Remember, so Ifka, you don't want us to tell. Okay. Anyway, in the audience here we have a filmmaker whose film I saw. It must have been 2007. Yeah.
Back when I was young.
Yeah. So but it was more rare, and it was harder to find people. And so now I think we have so many more things coming out that are by women that it's a whole different ballgame.
I found that movie to be kind of an eye-opener for me. It let me know where I had blinders. And so I started really searching out women horror films, people who were writing them, people who were creating them, because people ask me, why do you look at all of this diversity in horror on your podcast? And it's like, because I'm a selfish man who loves horror films, and I'm greedy, and I want all the good horror films. I want all the things. So if you're taking half of the population saying, nah, well, maybe someday you'll get to make a movie, I'm missing a lot of stuff. And so all I want is the best. And I think that there are perspectives that I have not seen. The element that I think is most important for horror is surprise. Everything else can be there. I think that horror is a feeling first and a setting far later. You don't have to have a type of person. You don't have to have it supernatural. There don't need to be monsters. There don't need to be castles. It can be anything. But the element of surprise is the most important thing. And if I've seen the same trope again and again, it can be very gratifying, it can be nice and wonderful. But really, I get knocked off my feet when I'm shocked and surprised.
Yeah.
And that happens with perspective changes.
And I think that's why diversity is important. Everybody has like mixed feelings on diversity. Some people are really like, oh, why do you have a women's film festival? So I have a women's film festival called Etheria, and we only show genre films directed by women. And a lot of people have a problem with that. A lot of people are like, well, that's totally sexist. And if you go by the definition of sexism, actually, yes, it is. It's discriminating against somebody because of, their sex. But, I feel like it gives a voice to a lot of people who have not had a voice in horror in the past. And like I said, I think that's changing a lot. And I think like my festival is part of that change in a way. It's, these things are becoming more common and people are becoming more aware. But, horror and film and art, they're all little microcosms of the greater culture. And when you have a culture that's dominated by a certain group of people that all think and act the same, your culture pie will be very small. And all those stories will be about those people and how they react to the world. And when you have more people making more art and writing more books and creating more films and painting more paintings, this cultural pie becomes so diverse and beautiful in a way that it can never be when it's that. It should always be expanding because there's always new kinds of people popping up. I'm sure as I get old, I'll be like, oh my God, who knew with that? There are people who are openly trans now. I know to my parents' generation, that would be like, what? How is that even, does that exist? But for us, it's like, well, yeah, that's the thing. And yes, gay people can get married now. And, so there are always going to be people who have been marginalized, who are finding their voice and making it cooler. And that's happening in horror. That's happening with, Get Out. That's a movie that would not have been made if the film industry was, not willing to work with people of color or tell a story that's primarily about people of color. Like it would have been a lost idea.
I think that's also, I had people ask me, why I go to so many conventions and what the hell is convention family, which is my extended family. People who I go to conventions, we've never met, but we start talking about movies and it's 6 o'clock in the morning before it's time to go to bed because we're so excited to just be connecting in this way. Why? We were probably marginalized at some point when we were kids.
Yeah.
We may have been the outsider. We may have been the one person that never got picked for kickball, whatever it might have been. But we find the thing that we really appreciated, we are able to connect on. And I don't think that it's a finished, it's like an uncompleted painting for me to watch a horror movie and not talk to somebody about it. It's like a friend of mine calls it foreplay. The movie is foreplay. The conversation afterwards is where it's fun.
I am terrible to watch a horror film with because I talk during the film.
Oh, great.
I will have I'll be like, and that's the guy from that. And, he's going to do this now. Oh my God, I've seen this
Larry
before.
Linville again?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I feel the same way. It's something to talk about. It's like going to a museum and then wanting to talk about what you see there with people afterwards. It's an experience to be shared. And I think it's very, I want to talk about how we talked about culture a little bit, but I want to make sure we get back to it because the generational thing, like I was saying, your story about your father is like a clear picture of that. Like different generations are going to have different ideas about what is beautiful and what's art, what's not. And we can look at the films that are being made at any given point, any decade, and figure out culturally what's going on.
Yeah.
And you write a lot about this, about what scares people at that time. You can tell by looking at their horror films. So you want to give a couple examples of the things that you came up with for your book?
Well, sure. I think it's something that has also been, I've been doing some interviews recently on podcasts and things, and I get these little left-handed compliments every so often. And one of the things was talking about how, you seem to really enjoy talking about the metaphors and allegories inside. He goes, don't you think that people are getting tired? There's a backlash against movies meaning something. And I'm like, I think horror movies have always meant something. It doesn't matter if the artist sat there and was ready to make a dissertation about what the thing was about. But if you're talking about a horror film, for God's sake, you're supposed to be attacking the thing that makes you nervous, what a culture thinks is frightening, what makes people anxious. And you need to know. It's not like, oh my goodness, we're eating meat on Fridays. And maybe for some people that is something. But if it's an antiquated idea, about what fear is, it may not connect with people. It needs to be something fresh. And I don't think that we all know at any given time. I don't think the artist knows, and I don't think the audience knows. We are just connected to an anxiety. And it isn't pro or con on that anxiety. Horror is wonderfully indiscriminate in that. Horror is a universal lover and hater of you. It is not here to, give you half its sandwich. It is really, you need to come to it and take that energy. And so I think when you're looking at things like Godzilla, you look at Godzilla and all of those giant ant movies and all of that in the 50s. Why did that happen? Well, they were just suddenly afraid of extremely large carapaces? Probably not. But what we find out is that if you look at what was going on, we just were the first superpower ever to drop nuclear bombs on innocent people, right? We were at war, but we did drop bombs on people. And no matter what your feelings are on that, and that can be very, very complicated, I think whether you were for it or you were against it, an anxiety was born that day. And that was, it could happen to us too. Or did what we do make any sense? Was that the right thing? And all of a sudden you have the Pandora's box being opened. I mean, if you watch the movie Them with the giant ants, they basically have a scientist basically saying that we have opened Pandora's box. Yeah. So there's no way to get around that metaphor. But then you look at something like Godzilla, which is really complicated because it's not attacking New York City and it's not attacking San Francisco. It's attacking Tokyo. So you've got this thing that a movie comes out with this giant dinosaur, which is being called a god, by the way. If you look at Godzilla, it is a sea god that everybody has believed in this area. And all of a sudden he comes up irradiated. He's got an extra thing now because they've been dropping hydrogen bombs in the water, which was what was happening. This all happens within a decade of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's not something in a history book, a dusty history book. That's like having a movie about 9/11 come out 6 years later. That's really, really, people be like, too soon. Yeah. That happened with Godzilla. And they made this movie and they were smart. They didn't hit you over the head with it. But that was an anxiety, whether you were pro-nuke or anti-nuke, you were nervous. And that's the thing, is the universality of what happens with horror. Same thing with like Rosemary's Baby and It's Alive and The Exorcist. Yeah. You have suddenly the ERA is going on, equal rights for women. People are upset. Jobs are being taken. Fights are happening. And all of a sudden we have the family unit falling apart. The guy is just this ineffectual thing in the corner, but there is this fight. What is going to happen with the child? What's the child going to do? And then the child is violent and killing people in the surgeries. And all of this stuff is happening. So you have these moments that are just typifying the anxiety of the times, whatever it is that frightens people. The slasher films, the more people came out about these movies being against violence against women, that's the more violent they got. They doubled down on that. But there was something there. Even if you're sitting there going, well, they killed men too. Yeah, but they also killed women. So what is this about? Why are we making these movies? And why is everybody upset? And why are they making money? Well, it's just part of the psyche. What I love about horror is that it's not good or bad. There are no such things as bad emotions. There's just emotions. What we do with emotions, that's the kicker. But the thing is, we deal with the shadow self. If we're fans of horror, we're basically looking at these things that disturb us. The things about us that we don't tell other people. Those thoughts that we have at bad traffic accidents, whatever it might be. How you think about your mother-in-law, whatever it is. There is this darkness inside of you, and it's okay. What I like is the idea of what Jung says, which is, we all have the personae, these masks that we put on, and, we have the shadow self. And you can ignore the shadow self at your own peril. In other words, ignore that all you want. But sooner or later, the shadow's going to say, I'm hungry. And it's going to come out. And that's when you get divorced and you get, millions of dollars in debt, whatever it is. But if you have these little handshakes, which is what I think horror films are, I think that that's actually very healthy. And as long as you're not doing it, of course, that's the big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a cathartic experience. Yeah. And for me, I know it is. For me, when I that unsettling, awful, oh my God, what did I just watch feeling is me getting rid of that so that I can be a normal person and not be, horrible inside. Yeah. I think it's the same kind of thing people get out of like jumping out of an airplane. Yeah. It's that feeling that you're just not going to get from anything else.
Yeah. And it's like Carol Clover famously said in a documentary. She's going, everybody always says it's about a catharsis. But what is it a catharsis for? And I'm like, what do you got? Yeah. Because the reality is, Horror and emotional things, visceral things, are not about this at all. These things like music, one note can change your day. You hear a song and you don't know why. You're not able to sit there and talk about this on some great level. Oh, I know what this is the problem of taxation. That's why I like this song. No, you're not thinking of any of those things. You are hitting on a visceral level. And what I think happens with horror is it transcends, it goes past, it gets past this thinking mechanism that does not want anyone to know how messed up it is. You can go to a psychiatrist and get work done if you know what the problem is. What I think horror does, music does, is that it allows you to hit on something that is you can't articulate. It is an emotion that is like, bleh, what's your problem? I have, ugh. There is no word for it. Yeah. Whatever it is that's deep in there, that's what horror works on. And I think that it's very medicinal to be able to do that. And you don't need to know. I don't think it's important to really know why these things work. It is art. It is something that anywhere else, all people say is, yes, but how does it make you feel? But if you say that at a horror film, they're like, you are weird. Yeah. And I don't think there's a difference.
Yeah. I think it's if you look at the original, The Thing from Another World, and then you look at the remake, it's very, it's very clearly two different sets of cultural problems that are, and I think your father's reaction and that generation's reaction to it is very telling, because you have this, atomic age where did we have a crash in Roswell, and we're inventing jet airplanes and all this stuff, and then you go into 1982 and you have this generation of young filmmakers who've watched all their friends die in Vietnam. And there was a lot of horrible, brutal things that were being brought to light that had usually in the past been hidden from people during wartime. And they were apparently, so affected by that, yeah, of course you're going to show the blood and the gore. It's like my friend's leg got shot off. Yeah. That's how bad, that's what it looks like,
That's why I don't like, even Carpenter does it. He talks about E.T. a lot. He gives E.T. so much power. The stronger film is The Thing. The Thing has its own energy. It doesn't need to apologize through using I think the reason that movie fell on such hard times that time is he got it right.
Yeah.
He was right. As much as that The Thing from Another Planet, Thing from Another World in 1951 was a perfect microcosm of what was going on in America, what we were afraid of. Watch the skies. Carpenter was right. He sat there and said, you know what we're worried about? We can't trust each other, period. Watch this. We are paranoid, not about what's up there. I don't know who this guy is right next to me. And things are falling apart. The idea that you would have a Hawksian, he loves Howard Hawks. He's not an idiot. He didn't go, I thought people didn't get along in Howard Hawks films. Yeah. Everybody works towards one thing in a Howard Hawks film. And so he knows that. He knew the rules. And he purposely went against that. Because it was a whole different time. And when he needed to comment about that, we needed to hear about it. And so my age, growing up, seeing all of the stuff that you were just speaking of, that our filmmakers were making because of the way that they were seeing the world, I was being indoctrinated by that film. And I had already seen it. I know when he says, and people say, well, we just wanted a good cry. I don't remember a lot of cry in 1982. I remember a lot of don't get in my way. I remember a lot of Jane Fonda workout and everybody's going to be Uber people and that we're better than the Russians and we're better than everybody. That was the thing. There was an arrogance that was happening at that time, which I think we tend to have come back and back. But I don't remember a touchy-feely 1982. I know that's what was being fed by E.T., what people wanted to believe 1982 was all about. But take a look at the news, what was going on 1980, 1981, and 1982, and tell me that we just wanted a good hug. No.
Yeah, E.T. is a very good kids movie.
Yes, it is.
I enjoyed it very much as a child.
Yeah.
But
ouch. Yeah, that's what Spielberg's ouch.
But and you can tell also by looking at films that are made in the early 2000s versus films that are, the aughts, if you will, versus the films that came out in the 90s. Like you have all these, self-aware, smart kind of Scream and Urban Legend and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and they're all very much like a parody, silly fun. And then you all of a sudden, after 9/11, we have all these horrible buildings knocked down and everybody's traumatized, you get a lot of found footage, horror films. Like I found the horribleness and we caught it on camera. This is, and it's all just a metaphor for those airplanes flying into the buildings. I think Hostel was also a reaction to 9/11 in a big way, because it was like, oh my God, you mean people around the world hate us because we're American? Like I think a lot of us were like, what? But we're so cool. No, they hate you. They hate Americans. Say you're Canadian. If you're going to go to Slovakia, say you're Canadian, because otherwise you're going to get screwed with. And that was I think that was an eye opener for a lot of very naive Americans like myself. And movies like Hostel, movies like The Ruins.
I love The Ruins. Yeah,
movies set in where you go to the other country and your vacation turns into a nightmare because of the locals who hate you because you're American. It's really, you would never get that in the 90s. That's just not a thing that would happen in 1996. And now I think we're almost 20 years past 9/11. It's shocking, but it's true. And I've noticed we've got all these superhero movies where we've got these helpless people in the big giant city, and then these big forces come in and they knock down buildings and they fight each other, and the people just can't do anything. They're just like watching this war happen between these superpowers, and we're all, and that's really the only characters in the story are these superpowers. I think that's sort of like our takeaway from 9/11. It was like that's kind of how we felt about it. That's how I felt about it, I think. And I think culturally that's reflecting our look back 20 years on it now. Is Iron Man, is America, and then Captain America, and then we have, and I think it's just, I don't really know if that was articulate or not, but I think it shows, but I think it's a way of looking at the past events of this century.
I think it's really interesting that comic book movies, the kind of themes that they're looking at right now. We're looking at one of the biggest ones being about a guy who is the bad guy who says, well, we got to kill half the people to keep this thing going. And we have our heroes saying, no, you can't. And then half of them disappear. I mean, that's not something, that's an argument. That's a major debate that we could talk about for a long period of time. And it's being brought up in a comic book movie. And we're watching people with all these superpowers and these great suits and everything disappearing into ash. And you could hear a pin drop. People are feeling something. So there's a definite sea change from what you saw, say, in the original Iron Man, well, not the original newest Marvel Iron Man, and what you see in, say, Infinity Wars. I'm interested to see where it goes from there. There's this strange maturity of what this idea of the cocksure, we made our mistakes, but now we're kind of on the right path to having something where tough, horrible choices are going to come, and what are we going to do about those? And that's a very interesting place to have stories, even horror stories. What do we do when the insane thing is the sane thought, right? And so I'll be interested to see where they take those movies from here. And I'm interested to see where we go with horror as well.
I wonder if it has anything to do with these weird supervillain billionaires that we have, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Like, no, seriously, because they are that. They could be Iron Man if they want. You could go to Mars if they wanted to, but they're just like so concerned with exploiting their employees in the Amazon warehouse instead. Like these are not the ideal people that we were hoping that would be a Batman or an Iron Man, or we're like, oh yeah, that's a fantasy. They're just jerks because they're billionaires. So I think maybe there's a little bit of a distaste for that, and we're looking at those characters as they do have flaws and they're not perfect, and there are arguments, and nobody does know what the right answer is.
So I know we could go on
we could go on for like 5 hours.
For everything that's involved in horror and culture. And I'm eternally grateful that everybody's come out to say hello today. I'm not necessarily sure how much time is left.
Does anybody have the time?
But how about Q&A?
I was about to say that.
10 minutes?
Does anybody have any questions for our author?
Why are you up there?
Yes.
Hi.
I guess going on with what you said last time about how a lot of films coming out currently are kind of reflective of the current culture. I don't know if you guys ever watched Sorry to Bother You when it came out last year.
I did not.
Well, I mean, since you're kind of going off that tangent about like phases and like unionization and stuff like that, that film kind of deals with that kind of subject matter. I highly recommend watching it.
Okay.
It's pretty cool.
It's got kind of, I would say that would be a good double feature with like Being John Malkovich, which came before that. And it had the same kind of absurdist look at rags to riches kind of ideas, and just the idea of celebrity, whatever that might be. And that's a very crazy film. And I love that I talk with people about that, and there are certain sequences which we won't give up here, but there's some pretty brutal stuff that's in that movie. And people are like, I would have loved that movie if it didn't do that.
No, it's like, well, I love the movie because it does that.
Right. Yeah. So that's why you're here listening to somebody talk about how horror can make you happy and healthy. And I thank you. Anyone else? Hey.
Hi. Where do you think horror is going to go to? Like, what are we going to see in the next 5 to 10 years?
There will be a large... No. I'm not necessarily sure. I think we're in a pretty cool time period. I know I was listening to someone else talk about this, and they were saying monster movies. We're going to have monster movies. And they've been saying monster movies for about a decade now. They've been saying this in Pacific Rim, really. And I don't know if what the major thing is going to be. What I like right now that I'm seeing is that there are so many different diverse streams. So when I was growing up, the slasher film was the predominant thing. There were always supernatural films, there were always different types, but the prominent thing that if you were going to watch horror films, they were opening every week, slasher films. It was crazy in 1982 especially. Now, because of streaming and all this other stuff, we have a healthy foreign horror area. I almost say, look overseas. See what's happening in Argentina and in Spain and in Mexico, and what's been happening in Asian films for the last 20 so years. I think that's where we're seeing real inspiration happening and really diverse ideas. But I see that there's room for everything now, with a caveat. I think that the thing is, because people ask, the next question is usually, well, do you think we're in a renaissance because all of this stuff is happening? It's like, in a way, yes, but with a very big caution, which is I don't think the Renaissance has anything to do with Bird Box and things like that are out there, A Quiet Place. That's where the mainstream is going, hooray, this is great. But I think that the real Renaissance is happening around that. The independent things, the A24s out there. Yeah. I think those are the places that are coming up with these small ideas with really small budgets. That's where the big caveat is. All the money's going to go to Bird Box 7. And we're all going to see a bunch of people at A24 getting half of what they were getting before with less time in production on both sides. And they're going to squirt blood until they get a great idea. And we're going to have a great idea come out of that pressure. I wish that we didn't have to have artists go through this great pain and pressure of people underpaying them for whatever they're going to try and do. But it seems that is the way that we get the next amazing adventure. So I think that we have... an opera. I would love to see Mexican wrestling horror films come back.
Oh, you know
I would
what?
love to see Santos and the Blue Demon.
Gigi Sol Guerrero has, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she, her company is called Luchagora, and they do have a full-length script that they're trying to get made, and it is a Mexican wrestling horror story.
I think that would be, it's just so perfect.
And it's a matter of time. I mean,
with superhero movies, there's just going to be this flip. And I think it would be so much fun to see something like that where people would be like, well, this is just, take my head off and throw it somewhere. I don't even know what they're talking about anymore. But it would be so much fun to have that kind of craziness that there is in those films, the absurdity of them, and talk about something social. Talk about the culture in some way through using the Blue Demon and Santos. I think it would be freaking awesome. And I think there's room for it. And I think that there's room for more hybrid vigor, which is something that I'm really big on. I love the idea that horror is really at its best when it is mixing with other genres. That's when it's at its richest, because it is the one that can do metaphor and allegory, science fiction as well, but allegory, metaphor, parable. I mean, horror is made for that. It's the second story that was ever told. The first one around the campfire is, I love you all, thank you for all being my family. And the second one right after that is, do not go over there. Og was eaten, and that is a terrible forest. Don't go in there. Everybody dies of poisons from that. And so because of that, I think that horror is always going to be able to mix with whatever the story is. And that's why I love things like Shape of Water. People are, that's not a horror movie, that's a ballroom dancing movie or something. They'll come up with whatever it is except for horror. It's like, it's a yes. It is a yes. It is not a genre.
Yeah.
He is freeing us from genre. It can be any and all of those things. It is a monster movie 1 minute. It is a musical another. It is a romance in another. It's a science fiction film. It's a satire. But there is monster all the way through that movie. There is horror all the way through that movie if you want to look at it. And I think that makes for power, and that makes for our ability to have stories never run out. That's what I think is fucking awesome. Anyway, anything else? I think I may have... Say I talked to him. Hi.
Knowing that you're such an expert in horror, what prompted you to want to write this book?
I think the main reason was for a deeper dive. So in a podcast, the reason that I did this is I spent 10 years in Silicon Valley, and I was very good at what I did, but it was for other people's passions. And I used to love horror films. I used to love movies. But what I did for about a decade was I just watched them and I didn't talk about them. I had no outlet. And so it worked until it didn't work. And then I felt I was compelled to speak about this. If I was going to die, I was going to have to get my words out there because I was just falling in love with this all over again. I needed that voice, that passion. I needed passion. And that's the playfulness of what the book is all about. I wanted to talk about what happened with me a couple times in my life where horror basically kind of saved me. It was the way back into society when I had kind of lost hope in different times. And so I did that with a podcast, and you can go down and talk, have a conversation with people. But a book, you can go a little bit deeper. You can talk a little bit more about it. And you can get a little bit more personal without people getting too bored. And I just found that if I was going to say something about like horror being happy and health, making you happy and healthy, it's not like I'm telling you that, oh, well, this will cure your lumbago, or, instead of taking radiation therapy, please watch all of the Friday the 13th films. Nothing like that. But what I say is that you can get a sense of playfulness back, which is so important. You can get passion back. You can learn to accept parts of yourself that went through trauma and say it's okay. You can laugh off certain things. You can turn off a fear. Once you get scared by a movie once, you can't get scared like that again. It's a thrill after that. You've taken a fear and turned it into a thrill. All of that stuff. And you can find community. You can find people just like you. So if you're okay with yourself, you have a sense of humor, sense of playfulness, and all of a sudden you have a community, I think your life just got better. And so that's why I think that kind of thing can happen.
Yep. Yes. The horror community is one of the most supportive, amazing communities I've ever experienced in my life. And I mean, frankly, the only supportive community that I've experienced in my life. To be honest, I went to high school, I did all that, and jobs don't really get, but when you find a group of people that you have these that there's an understanding where you can talk about things that you cannot talk about with an ordinary person. Like you meet a regular normie and you have to, talk about, I hate Trump or whatever. But then if you talk to a horror, it's like, oh, you're horror. Oh, did you see blank? What'd you think of blank? Did you see, oh, but you're aware of that, right? Oh, and it's like this underground kind of conversation that only a real horror fan can have with another horror fan. Yeah. And it's awesome.
We're happiest on the island of misfit toys.
Yes.
Yeah. And I see that as a big piece of, when I go to horror conventions, we laugh a lot. And I don't see too many downturned frowns. These are a lot of people who, for the most part, if you were to look at the first act of their lives, may not have been that fantastic. Some may have dodged a bullet, but I can tell you that most of the people that I know had a hard time at some point in their lives. And now they are so happy with the second act. And they're just doing this thing, and they find whatever they were considered the most odd about, they're able to unite and make that a positive. And I see that as freaking awesome. And so I love I hope you're all going to Monsterpalooza, because I will say that is the brethren. You will find whatever you are looking for in that there forest.
Oh, and I want to say one last thing that's really unique about horror that I've thought about a lot, which is, you can be a fan of romantic comedies, or you can be an action film fan, but horror is the only genre where you can go to a convention and get something signed by your favorite director. Like, this does not happen. Like, you're not going to get Julia Roberts at something where you could, I loved Eat, Pray, Love. It's not going to happen. But horror, even you can get Guillermo del Toro. He will sit down and he will shake your hand and he will have a conversation with a fan about horror. And it makes it's accessible in a way that no other genre of film is in that sense. And I think it also is very encouraging of Oh, you do want to do a podcast? Go ahead.
Yeah.
We would listen to it. Oh, you do want to write a book? Oh, you want to be a horror actress? Totally, we'll watch your film. You want to be a filmmaker? Like, people support each other and they come out for things.
Yeah.
Like this. People will come out and be like, I want to hear about that, and support that person.
And I think that that's a very interesting thing as well. What I like about horror is that you mentioned, with a normie, you may have a problem being able to talk about certain things. That's what I love about horror. You're talking about taking a separation between the burning tire fire that is politics. Yes. And you turn it into, it's a giant scorpion fighting a giant ant. And it's like, if you're going to get upset and start getting into a fight over a rubber monster, you're an asshole. Yeah. And so you have the ability to take all of that and remove that and still be in a conversation about that kind of thing. And that's what I love. Yeah. I love that. Probably the perfect movie about that is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a movie that no matter what, even if you look at who made it, you still don't know what it really was what side it was trying to take. That is amazing filmmaking, because the wisdom of being able to sit there and not side on either way, to allow the subtext to be like below instead of being the actual text, is so important. That's why that movie lasts for so long, because it can be supported on both sides and it's still talking about the same anxiety. It doesn't matter what side of the coin. And very, very few films have that kind of wisdom. Anyway, I think our time may be up.
All right, so what we're going to do is first a signing. Yes. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. Scott.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Del, and thank you to Book Launchers. We have Sarah here from Book Launchers. If you're interested in finding out how somebody like me can actually get a nonfiction book out, Book Launchers is a great, great service.
All right, so we'll get going here in just a second, and we'll just line up at the end of the table.
Thank you, everybody.
And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.